Hello and welcome to today's presentation, created specifically for RAPS 2021 Convergence, brought to you by Fosun Diagnostics and LexisNexis ReadTech. Today's presenters will provide key insights into navigating Europe and China UDI, Unique Device Identification. The discussion topics will cover key considerations in China UDI implementation differences and timing, presented by Alex Jiang, Vice President Quality at Fosun Diagnostics, and best practices for medical device UDI and product registration in UDIMED, covered by Gary Sainer, Senior Manager of Information Solutions for the Life Sciences vertical of ReadTech. We've allotted time at the end of the presentation to cover incoming questions, so feel free to submit those at any time in the Q&A chat box. The presenters will cover as many as possible in the last 15 minutes. Our first presenter is Gary Sainer. Gary is a subject matter expert on UDI and other structured content reporting that is submitted to regulatory agencies and commercial organizations. He serves as co-chair of the industry's structured product labeling technical team and represents ReadTech on the advisory board of the Medical Devices Group. A little bit about ReadTech. ReadTech is the go-to company for the preparation, submission, and lifecycle data management of medical device UDI product info. As industry experts, they've innovated in the SBL space since the beginning, participating as subject matter experts and pilots and trade groups. ReadTech systems are 21 Part 11, Annex 11 compliant, and they annually submit about 31% of all electronic FDA Good ID SPL records. In the global UDI space, ReadTech has active submission channels for US, China, South Korea, and testing and staging for EU, and a roadmap for international UDI IDs. With over 330 medical device customers, they serve small to mid-size and large organizations via the ReadTech Single Source for Medical Devices system, providing flexible role assignments for in-country representatives as well as corporate users for a shared view into UDI data. With that, I will turn the presentation over to Gary Sainer, who will take us through best practices for medical device UDI and product registration in UDIMED.
We have a lot to cover in this particular session, so we'll get started. The topics that we want to touch on would include a quick review of the global health authorities and their timelines, take a little bit deeper dive into a few key health authorities and give a summary of what is happening there. And then we'll focus the majority of the time on the European Union medical device regulation and in vitro diagnostic regulation, describing some of the guidelines and the requirements, and take a look at some of the timing. We'll also touch on the new UDIMED database that is being put in place to support MDR and IVDR and some of the UDI requirements. We'll touch on the two-level hierarchy of the device identification inside UDIMED. So there's a concept of a device and a group referred to as the basic UDI-DI, and also a similar structure for the legacy devices. And then we'll close off this session with the 4 C's of implementing UDI device registration. Now, there's a number of slides in here that I'll skip over rather quickly and leave those for your homework. And we want to cover a lot of particular topics in this session. So if you don't mind looking into those when you download the materials. To get us started, I thought I'd do a quick level set. If you're coming in cold and don't have too much experience with UDI, you might want to ask, well, what the heck is this UDI thing? It is an identifier for a medical device, and it's unique. It's consisting of 2 parts that are created by the labeler or the manufacturer per an approved issuing agency standard. So the first part is a device identifier. It identifies the labeler and a specific version or model of a device. The second part is the production identifier, and that is conditional. So you might not have any here. You might have these particular 4 that are showing the manufacturing date, expiration date, lot or batch number or serial number. The FDA and EU have some variations on this particular list. But again, they're conditional whether or not those identifiers are on your label. Then they would need to be included in the UDI. So if you simply add the device identifier and a production identifier together, you get the full UDI. And again, the PI portion is conditional. So in this particular example, I'm using the GS1 standard to represent some values. And the first value there in red would be the device identifier. And that would be followed in this particular example, the production identifiers that identify manufacturing date, expiration date, lot, and the serial number. So with that said, I'd like to take a look at the context of UDI initiative. So this is not a point solution. It's not just the US or it's not just the EU. We need to realize that this has a global scope. There are a number of different health authorities that have already implemented requirements, and you see the list there, starting with the US. And there's a second wave, if you will, another group of health authorities that are about to release some documentation and put some requirements in place. So the little takeaway here is that there's numerous regulators that have or all will in the near future require product information per these UDI standards. If we were to take this information and lay it out in a timeline, we've been tracking this going back to 2014 time frame. And starting off with the US, there's a number of health authorities that are starting to come on board and lay requirements down. And you see on this graph, 2019, 2020 start to get busy with a number of other health authorities. If we look at this year, 2021, there is half a dozen or so health authorities that are starting to implement their requirements or continue their requirements. 2022 is just as busy, and guess what? You go out to the future, 2023, 2024, and so on. It doesn't stop. There's a number of additional compliance dates in the near horizon here. Down at the bottom of this chart are a number of health authorities that have some dates that to be decided. So Australia is actually making very good progress. China has released their second batch timeline, and we'll see how the other classes come into play. But there's a number of health authorities that will most likely release their particular UDI requirements very shortly. With that said, there are a few health authorities that I'd like to focus in on. We don't have time to dig into all these little details, but I want you to know that there are these note cards available, if you will, for each of these different health authorities. The takeaway for the US is the Class 1 device date coming up in September of 2022. The other classes have already been taken place in the past and already submitted data, and UDI compliance is now in place. For South Korea, there are a number of classes schedules already in place, just past the July deadline of 2021, and the track and trace is unique to this particular health authority, so there's reporting that has to be done in addition to the UDI. The UK has a pretty full note card here. What is significant here is that obviously with the breakaway from the EU, they've launched out and put a number of requirements in place. 2023 is a significant time where the CE mark is no longer allowed. You can start using the UK CA mark, the UK conformity assessed mark, even now, but it will be required in July of 2023. There's some registration requirements in the bottom left this year, so be aware of that. And just to complicate matters, Northern Ireland is going to be observing the MDR and IVDR regulations, more aligned with the EU rather than this particular description for the UK. So there's some issues there. For Saudi Arabia, August of this year, there was a date required for the Class D, the high-risk devices, and we have expected perhaps a delay on that, or some some grace period for that particular product line. So the Class Ds may not have to be in by August 1, but we'll look for an official word from the Saudi Arabia. And that moves us over to the European Union. So this is what we want to focus on the next period of time. Noteworthy is the medical device date of application has taken place. So May 26, 2021, as of that date, the number of modules or number of provisions inside the regulation have come into force. Your Class 1 self-certification is now required to put those devices on the market, and Unimed is being rolled out. September is a noteworthy date, and we'll take a look at that particular time when a voluntary opening of device registration will be started. All right, so the European Union MDR and IVDR has been rolled out and replaces 3 directives, and they had various implementations in each of the member states. They are now replaced by 2 regulations that I referred to earlier, the MDR and IVDR. The nice thing about that is it's a regulation, so the uniform conformance will be binding across all the European Union member states, whereas before there was some flexibility and variations in the way it was implemented. But the bad news is this MDR and IVDR really does clear the table, and those particular regulations establish a whole new set of requirements, and so there's a lot to be done. One of the things that is created with the new MDR is Unimed is going to be rolled out with 6 different modules. There's an economic operator, or nicknamed the actor module. There's a UDI and device registration module. There's a certified notified body module. And the other 3, the clinical investigations, vigilance, and the market surveillance modules are all make up the full database of Unimed. So there's time periods. These are not being rolled out all at once. Economic operators are already available, and we'll see how this particular timing is in play, but we'll see that eventually the public then will have access to a number of these different modules and a lot of data. Unlike Unimed in the past, this new version will be very visible and public facing. When you take a look at the MDR, you'll find that your products will fall into 3 different categories. Those products that you have a certificate for and that are not going to be continued after the date of application. So there is this group of products that for whatever reason you decide not to continue to market those. Then the second category is the legacy devices. Those devices have a certificate, and with some various restrictions, you're able to continue to place them on the market with a period of time. Eventually, that period of time ends, and if you want to continue to market that device, it would have to comply with the MDR. So that is a third category, the MDR and IVDR compliant devices that do meet all the regulations put forth by the new requirements. If we lay these 3 categories out, we'll see that they need to be timed with the Unimed launch. So the particular items on this timeline show the date of application and the fact that the first module, actor module, is now available as voluntary as of December of 2020. We expect the second and third modules, the UDI, to be available in September 2021. And then the 3 additional modules are to be decided. So they might actually slip from what we understand. There's some activity that is taking place in the development of those particular modules. But right now, officially, they will be done, and the Unimed announcement, the Unimed notice that the Unimed system is fully functional is expected to be in May 2022. And again, some softness in that particular date from what we understand. There may be a little bit delay, but that's the official date currently. So that particular notice starts a 6-month period, followed by an 18-month mandatory registration period. So keep that in mind when you're recording the registration of your legacy devices and also the registration of your MDR compliant devices. You have a voluntary period followed by this mandatory period. Now, bear with me, this slide's going to get a little busy, but there is a number of milestones connected with legacy devices that we'll touch on first. So continue to place those on the market up to the date of application, and thereafter for 3 additional years, and then that is followed by 1 year sell-off. There's this registration period, this 18-month registration period. If we layer on the MDR compliant devices, there's a number of milestones there for placing UDI on the label. In some cases, those products need to have UDI placed directly on the product. And again, this 18-month window coincides with what I mentioned before. The in vitro diagnostic timeline looks very similar. The start is 1 year later with the date of application. So this legacy window is now only 2 years long, but you see some milestones there for the in vitro diagnostic. So we covered the timeline, what you need to do with some of those devices. Let's touch on what the actual regulations talk about for UDI. It's very similar to the particular requirements that you might find with the US. There's 4 major areas that I'd like to touch on. One is putting that identifier on the label itself. And in some cases, if your product falls into a reusable category, you have to direct mark that product. And then thirdly, there is a number of attributes that need to be reported to the UDIMED database for registration purposes. And there are some other requirements. So the annual reports, the post-marketing surveillance, and so on. UDI does need to be included on the patient implant card. So there's a number of different activities that you'll need to apply to your standard operating procedures inside your company to comply with the MDR. If we take a look at the label, just do a real quick scan of the label. There's a medical device symbol. There's also an IVD symbol. There's warnings. There's a lot of electronic IFU references. But for our particular discussion, UDI is now going to be required. You may have been using UDI in the past for your product, but now it is a requirement to include that on the label. In addition to that label requirement, these are the fields that are needed to be reported to the UDIMED UDI module. So I mentioned earlier that there's a 2-structure hierarchy. The first one is a group level or a family. In this particular record has 36 particular attributes. The key identifier is this basic UDI. We'll take a look at that in a little bit more detail. I mentioned that this is the list in Data Dictionary version 7. Recently, the Data Dictionary version 7.1 was distributed internally inside European Commission and also to those testers. So we have taken a look at that. At the time of this particular RAPS conference, we might in fact have that publicly available. There is a second level down at the individual device level, and there's a number of additional attributes, 73 total attributes that need to be recorded for the individual device. And again, this list might change a little bit with the 7.1 dictionary. Some of the characteristics might also change, but the key field in this data set is this UDI-DI and a linking value that places this particular record and connects it back to the parent, the basic UDI-DI. So while we're talking about basic UDI-DI, let's dive into that a little bit deeper. We get a lot of questions about that. So this is a group identifier, and there are a number of attributes about that device identifier that need to be common for every device in that particular group. So one parent, one buddy can have many devices inside it, one to many. There are some requirements on the creation of that. We'll take a look at an example here shortly. And there's some standards. Obviously, each of the issuing agency has rules about how you go about creating it. So if we use the GS1 again as an example to understand this basic UDI, GS1 references this identifier as a global model number, GMN, and has a spec references that particular item and guidances and so on. this is the particular construction of that GMN, buddy in this particular case. So you make use of your company prefix that you have been using down in the lower level. This lower row shows the UDIDI and the company prefix in use there. Very same company prefix, no additional subscription is required. You can reuse that, but then you need to follow that with your model reference number, and in this case, a 2 check character. There is a generator to have that automatically calculated for you. Noteworthy is that the model reference can be alphanumeric, upper lowercase in numbers, and no barcodes associated because you never place this particular item on the label. So the structure of this particular hierarchy, so if we start off at a particular group, let's say you might be manufacturing forceps. So you create this buddy with that particular identifier, and underneath that identifier, you place one of your products, a plastic forceps, and it might have some hierarchy within that particular packaging level. But most importantly, there might be another model that you have, a stainless steel version of those forceps. It could be in the very same group. And if you had a stainless steel locking model, again, it would fall in there, and you get the idea that you can add one to many. Now, when we go to that other category, the legacy category, so you may have been using UDI on that particular product already, and because the MDR did not force you to comply with UDI requirements for legacy devices, they're obviously put on the market under the legislation, the directives. So, and yet the European Commission wants to record information about those legacy devices. Certainly, in the event that if there's an adverse event, there has to be some recording of a serious incident and linking back to the attributes and so on. So what the European Commission has elected to do is create alternatives. So they didn't have the legal grounds to force UDI on those products, but for registration purposes in the database, they created 2 identifiers, UDIMED DI and UDIMED ID. And you see the relationship there. One's at the basic grouping level, and the other is at the individual device. So the way that particular UDIMED DI and ID are created is you simply add a prefix to your particular UDI-DI if it's a valid UDI-DI. So you might have been using GS1 or HIPIC or one of the other approved identifiers. Very straightforward. Just place a D dash in front of that for the device and a B dash in front of that for the basic group. If you had not been using a valid UDI, then it becomes a little bit more complicated. We don't have time to get into that, but you're able to derive a particular identifier to make an entry into the database. The structure that we looked at just earlier is now going to be different for your legacy devices. So you do have a basic identifier, this UDIMED DI for the group, and the plastic forceps just like before. Now in the database, the D dash would be used and a B dash would be used for recording that. Noteworthy is that the packaging is not reported for those particular legacy devices, but this is where it's significant. Each of those other models, let's say you're manufacturing those forceps, a stainless steel model has its own basic identifier. So UDIMED DI has a dedicated identifier for the stainless steel forceps, and you can see how it's constructed. The device identifier is simply changed from a D hyphen to a B hyphen, and that creates the group. But it's totally separate from the plastic forcep group. And in same fashion, the stainless steel locking device has its particular UDIMED DI, and it's unique to it. And again, it's the same identifier, just with a different prefix. So that's a different concept from the basic UDI. All right, moving on. We need to take a look at those particular steps. The the 4Cs for implementing UDI and device registration. So most likely those companies that are involved with the MDR have started on this particular path. They might be 4 or so, or a couple steps into this step process. But the very first one is to get that team together, figure out where you are, what you need to do, what has to be changed, establish the environment. And then the second step is to collect the data in regards to this particular UDI. And there's a number of challenges there. Most likely this is not all in one spot ready to go. You have to go find it, assemble it, make sure who owns it for updates and so on, and then cleanse that data. So by that I mean normalize it, make sure it's valid to the requirements of the health authority, in this case UDIMED. We're talking a little bit in more particular about that. Number of requirements there, and establish version controls. So these values could change over the course of time as you clean them up. So making sure there's some governance over the data set is very important. And then eventually you will need to submit that data. So as of September of 2021, this voluntary module would be open and you could start doing that, explore the possibility of moving that data into the UDIMED database, making sure that those submissions are received and successful with the acknowledgements coming back, and making sure the data is eventually then published. So you do need to maintain that over the course of time. So if there's changes, there's some responsibilities there. So what I'd like to do is sum up with some lessons learned. Very strong suggestion to think globally. Don't think of this in the European sense as a single point. Or we want to encourage you to have the particular approach that you make be able to expand into each of the different regions. Start early. There's a number of reasons. Obviously, your class 1s need to be self-certified by the date of application. You can now go into the actor module in UDIMED and register your company and receive a single registration number. Some of the advantage of starting early is that you get this foundation built inside your infrastructure, and you can build upon that. There's some training and some SOPs that need to be in place, education and so on. And secondly, on the technical side, you become familiar with this data set. You start to collect the data, find out what's missing, and then you can start collecting the data and cleansing it so that you're ready for submissions into the UDIMED. In that fashion, you avoid the rush, and we do expect a rush. The European Commission indicates that there will be a huge backlog, not only inside their support system, but also in notified bodies. Expected to have a lot of activity coming the deadlines. So work on this early is the recommendation, and in that way, if you do get it done in time, then you can reallocate some of those resources for those other pending health authorities. Just a couple other quick notes on lessons learned. Watch for updates. This is not a static set of regulation or guidance documents, I should say. They keep changing. Timing changes, so keep your ear out for those particular updates. Get that infrastructure in place, prepare your data. This is going to be significantly harder and roughly twice as many attributes as the FDA. So the whole concept of this hierarchy just complicates matter. So be aware that it is a challenge, and look at the possibility of industry support. There's a lot of subject matter experts available. Make sure that you connect up to them. And with that, what I'd like to do is maybe turn the microphone over to Alex and have him give some very valuable details about the implementation of UDI in China.
So today I would like to spend some time for the China UDI implementation. Before go to the content, I want to give you a quick introduction about myself. So far, I'm working for Fosun Diagnostics, a Fosun company. focus on the quality job. Previously, I'm working for Smith & Nephew and Johnson & Johnson. Why I'm here? It's just because since 2013, I have been participating in the Chinese UDI legislation, have the very active work with the Chinese government officers about the UDI implementation. Also at the part-time, I did some help sharing through different social tools to promote the knowledge sharing of UDI. Besides UDI, I'm also work for the quality management system. I'm a member of the SAC-TC 221, focus on QMS. It's equivalent to ISO TC 210. So as an extension to that job, I do be a very active person advocator for the eQMS system. Okay, this is some communication for myself. Let's go to the key contents for today. In today's portion, I'm going to cover these topics. Start from the policy, regulation, and standards, then move to the accredited issuing agency for UDI, Chinese implementation schedule. After that, I would like to explain 3 very special areas for Chinese UDI implementation. Let's move on. Start from 2016 and 2017, the Chinese government and different ministries started to publish policies and regulation to emphasize the importance for traceability system. But at that time, the UDI wording is not introduced formally yet. Then move to 2018, the first standard about UDI, fundamental requirement for UDI was introduced. Then the next year, it's a very busy year. The rules for UDI, the unique device identification system was introduced officially by NMPA. Actually, you can consider that is the starting point for Chinese UDI implementation. Meanwhile, at the top, you can see this special policy mention the reform plan for managing high volume medical consumables. You may didn't understand the relation between high value medical consumables and UDI. In the last portion of this slide, I will give you a very clear introduction why there's a relation. Also in the standard area, the basic terms of UDI was introduced. Next year, 2 more standards about the UDI database and the reporting in the UDI database were introduced. And also there's another policy, deepening regulatory reform, also linked back to the UDI. Last month, I think when we have the RAPS meeting is already 3 months ago, I should say July 2021, the regulation for medical device supervision and management, the top level regulation for medical device in China was totally reformed. In this new version, the UDI was explicitly mentioned there. Okay. In this page, I just extract the most important regulation. The first one is the rules for unique device and identification system, published August 2019. This year, the top level regulation was totally reformed, formally mandate UDI implementation from the top level regulation. Okay. If we look at the issuing agencies of UDI from Europe, US to China, there are always 3-4 issuing agencies for each country or market. We can see the common one is GS1. And also look at the current situation in the China UDID database. More than 91 of the data actually are based on GS1 standard. there's only very limited, less than 4%, using the second one, the ZIIOT code standard, almost nothing from the third option, the Ali code. So if we look at the details for the different coding schema, we can find the GS1 GT. Oh, this one, sorry. What happened? The GS1 GT and the second one, MA code, is very, very similar. And the other one, the Ali code, is slightly different. The company can always find the details about the three barcode standards, the three code standard, and the details of the issuing agencies from the NMPA website. There is a dedicated web page for UDI. Let's move on. In this page and the next 3 pages, I'm going to give you some overall about the implementation schedule. There is a cutting off date, 2021, January 1st. Prior to that, there was around 1.5 years pilot program. After that, we start the first batch product implementation. Now move to the second batch. Let's go to the details. Back to July 2019, NMPA started the UDI pilot program. This program lasts almost 1.5 years until December 2020. Within this 1.5 years, the pilot program has a simulated manufacturers and selected hospitals to attend. Most of the product are high risk implants, but to ensure this pilot can cover different scenarios, they also selected some low value consumables. The big equipment try to cover different types of medical device, different classes. So this is some key step mentioned here. From January 1st, 2021, NMPA started the first batch implementation. Okay, you may have interest what mean first batch, because in China, the NMPA did not publish the complete or full schedule for the UDI implementation for all the medical devices. The NMPA just announced a group of product will be batch 1. When the batch 1 is quite mature, the NMPA will have another notice and announce what will be the scope for batch 2. So it's like batch by batch approach, not like the US is in the beginning, FDA published the complete schedule. I think either way, there's advantage and disadvantage. US, that you have clear understanding, prediction, when my class will come. But in the end, you may see the schedule actually is postponed. But in NMPA, try to take a different rule. They have confidence, they published the implementation time for this group. When this group is fully ready, they move to the second batch, try to avoid the implementation slippage. For the first batch implementation, it covers, actually is very small group, 9 categories, cover the surgical instrument, imaging equipment, blood transfusion, dialysis, and other categories. Go to the deep level, overall it covers 69 subcategories. All of these categories are within the class 3 devices according to the NMPA rule. Meanwhile, NMPA also encourages more companies, even they are not mandated in this batch, they are encouraged to voluntarily participate in the UDI implementation. especially for the product following the National High Value Medical Consumable list. This is the second time I mention this list. I'll explain the linkage in the end of this portion. Let's move on. Now, we are in the middle of the year. This month, NMPA published a notice to solicit the opinions for the second batch implementation. The second batch actually cover all the class 3 devices according to the NMPA rule. It's not officially confirmed, but we all think there should be no change. The formal rule will be like this. From March 1st, 2022, all the class 3 medical device, if they want to be showed in Chinese market, are mandated to have the UDI data on the label and the entry into the UDID database by NMPA. Okay. In the remaining portion of this deck, I want to introduce several, I think should be 3 key considerations for Chinese UDI implementation. The first one is the importance for manufacturing date. This is because we have different convention between US or Europe and China. It is, if you go to the supermarket, you will find in China market, every product on their label, there's a manufacturing date. But in US, you always have expiration date, similar in Europe. It's different as in China. So due to the convention different, NMPA regulation require all the different parties verify whether a product is manufactured within the valid period of a registration license. The license have 5 years period, valid period with from date to date. So due to that reason, the supply chain and hospitals are very keen to include the manufacturing date in UDI, although it's not mandated by the UDI regulation, because it will make their life very easy with very simple scanning. They get the manufacturing date, complete the verification. The data format is same as the US rule. That's no different, but just to need to be clear. In China, when we mention date, it must be exact date, not just 2 months. It must be day, month, and date. And the second difference is when the company needed to have the UDI ready. In China, according to the current guidance, a manufacturer needed to assign the UDI prior to the product registration submission. Once they do the submission to NMPA, in their dossier needed to include the mapping from the product to the UDI, to the DIs, not the complete UDI, just the DI. The rest is different. The rest is upload the UDI, upload the data to UDID prior to release the product to market. That is the same as US. So we can find the key difference. If you want in China to meet the NMPA rule, the manufacturer needed to have the UDI, exposed to the authorities at the early phase of the registration. It's not like in US. You can have your 510K ready when you release the product to market. At that time, you have the DI go to the authorities database. That is key different. The reason behind that is when you look at the Chinese registration certificate, it always includes the exact code list. When the UDI is introduced, the DI will eventually replace the catalog number. So that's why the authority, the NMPA, requires the UDI from the beginning, requires the DI information from the beginning. Okay, The last portion I want to give a explanation about the high volume product and UDI. That will, in this section, I'll highlight the key, very famous wording currently in China: national tendering and volume purchasing. This purchasing is organized by National Insurance Security Administration. It's a payer to all the hospitals for all the government-owned health insurance. So this tendering and the volume purchasing has national level impact because it covers all the public hospital and the most market share. It's more than 80% of the yearly market share. If a company loses this national tendering, the company also need to can only fight for the remaining small share, less than 20%, also need to sell the product at the lowest binding price. It's very huge impact. So to achieve that target, the authorities intend to control the health insurance spending by cutting the price of the high value consumables in a phased approach. During this exercise, UDI is selected as their important tool to achieve this target. In the beginning, the same. The factory provides the data to NMPA. NMPA thing have the data transparent to the different user. But after that is different. The payer will have the date, transaction, price, and usage volume. All of this information sharing will link to the DIs and PIs. Based on that, the hospital gets the payment. Hospital also pay back to the manufacturers. So you can, from here you can see DI or UDI will play a very important role to achieve the government tendering target. Here I want to also share a little bit of information here. You may heard the first product went through the national tendering and volume purchasing. That was heart stent last year. With that, there was a big price drop from almost around $3,000 to just more than $100. It's a big drop. Now moving to the second product joint, we'll see what happened then next. Okay, in summary, even the UDI implementation is driven by NMPA, but there's no complete schedule for all the classes. Because there's reason, as I mentioned in the previous page, the payer and hospital really expect the UDI to be used for all the medical devices as quick as possible to achieve their target. With this background in mind, as a result, in many provinces, the local authorities jointly announced the local roadmap for Class 3 and Class 2 devices. It's much ahead of the national level implementation schedule by NMPA. So, as a result, we expect to see the China UDI implementation will go very fast. It's not due to the NMPA schedule, but driven by the payer. That is my portion to share about the China UDI implementation. Thank you.